Hello everybody and welcome to our webinar, What Practical Tools are Available to Tackle Vacant and Derelict Land. This is part of the Scottish Land Commission series, Land at Lunch, which is run across winter and spring. And this is actually our final session for this series. We finish at 12:45 today. I'm really delighted to be joined today by Lisa Busby, who is our training coordinator. She's going to run through some of the tools we have on vacant and derelict land. Also by Carey Doyle, who is the manager of the Community Ownership Hub for Glasgow and Clyde Valley. Carey works for Community Land Scotland. I'm also joined by David Henderson, who is the advisor for the Community Ownership Support Service team at the Development Trust Association Scotland. And finally, I'm also joined by McSporran, who is head of social enterprise development for Highlands and Islands Enterprise. Today's session will run as follows. Lisa's going to talk to us about some of the resources that the Commission has, partly produced with partners, and that's about helping communities to get started on tackling vacant and derelict land. Then each of our guest speakers will introduce their organisation and the work that they do in this area, the support that they can offer. We'll then have a discussion time and time for questions. So please do be thinking of them throughout all of the presentations. Don't be shy and pop them into the Q&A box throughout. And feel free, of course, to introduce yourself and chat in the chat box throughout the session. I'll pass you over to Lisa now, who is going to do some housekeeping for us and a quick poll as well. Thanks, Lisa.
Thanks, Emma. And if you want to, you can stop sharing your screen now. Great. So yeah, we just have a few pieces of information and housekeeping to share before we begin. As you probably saw on our holding slides and also in the information in the chat that I've just posted, today's webinar is recorded, including the chat and the Q&A. Information on how the recording will be used and our full privacy policy is also in there in the chat. Everyone's camera and mic are off by default today, but we welcome your questions in the Q&A box and comments in the chat box. Questions and comments in the Q&A box can be anonymous if you wish them, but just remember that your screen name is always visible in the chat. In today's session, we also have the option for you to turn on closed captions or subtitles. This function is enabled using the CC button, so have a look for that on the control panel at the bottom of your screen if you want to turn those on. Now, these are auto-generated, so there may be a few inaccuracies, but sorry about that if that's the case. We're going to be collating feedback throughout the session in the form of some short Zoom polls as well, and we're really grateful for your input into these. The polls are anonymous. We don't share the answers to the entire group, and again, more info on how we use that data has been already posted into the chat. I also just want to flag that today we're going to be signposting a lot of resources. We're going to be posting those links in the chat as we go along as far as we can. So that you can access any that we're talking about straight away. You can have the live link and go and look at that straight away if you want to. But just to say that we do collate all our resources and tools on a single resources page. So if you miss any, if you don't quite catch them, we will share the link to that resources page at the end of the session in the chat, and that has everything in the one place for you. Okay, so if you have any questions at all on any aspect of this housekeeping, you can go ahead and pop them into the chat. But right now I'm going to get you involved and launch our first poll. So let's just take a minute to do that. So hopefully you can see a box on the screen, which just gets a sense of who's in the room today. There are 4 quick questions. You do have to scroll through to answer them all. And as I say, we're really, really grateful for your input into that. So please go ahead, fill those in for us, and I'll be quiet and let you do that now. Okay, I think we'll get started. We're crushing a lot in today. So I'm going to end that poll now. We've got a good return on that. And yeah, as Emma says, I'm gonna open today with just a little bit of an intro and some information on the resources available on the Scottish Land Commission's website. So Scotland has almost 11,000 hectares of vacant and derelict urban land. This legacy of our industrial past means that almost a third of the Scottish population lives within 500 metres of a derelict site. In areas or communities facing deprivation, this figure rises to 55%. The consequences of these sites are significant. They blight communities, they harm well-being, they limit opportunities. but they could help some of society's biggest challenges. Bringing abandoned and unloved urban places back into productive use could help us tackle climate change, improve health and well-being, create more resilient communities, and rebuild our economy in a way that helps everyone achieve their full potential. Now, this is actually the second part of a two-part Land at Lunch. And in our last Land at Lunch webinar 2 weeks ago, we were introduced to two fantastic projects that have transformed vacant and derelict land. We heard from South Seeds in Glasgow about their Croft garden project and the High Mill in Carluke. We heard directly from representatives on approaches to and ideas for community participation, on fundraising, on reflections about leasing versus owning sites, and lots more. Very shortly, you can watch the recording of that webinar, as well as the entire Land at Lunch series on the Scottish Land Commission YouTube channel. And you can also find lots more community success stories in transforming vacant and derelict land on our website. Emma's going to pop some links to those things in the chat in a moment. But as I say, in today's webinar, we're going to look at support, tools and resources you can access to address unloved land in your local area. And I'm going to start by highlighting what resources the Scottish Land Commission and partners have developed. A good place to start is the online vacant and derelict land community route map. That was a bit of a mouthful, sorry. And this was developed by DTAS and the Scottish Land Commission. It's a step-by-step interactive map, and it sets out a series of situations, challenges, or barriers that communities commonly face. And then these questions are then in turn answered with a series of information pages with live links to resources and support from many different organisations. And what I'm going to do now is very, very quickly just show you that. So I'm going to share my screen. Here we go. I hope you can all see that. So this is the community vacant and derelict land route map. It's hosted on the My Land Scotland website. And yeah, as you'd expect, you click on this green button to enter and start the journey through the map. So what is on this first page? You are presented with a scenario. There's a vacant and derelict land or building in my community. And you're presented with a series of options. Depending on your aspirations and depending on your situation will depend on which one of these you click on. You might want to find out about how the site can be brought back into use, in which case you would click here. You might want the owner to solve the problem of the site, in which case you would click here. Let's click through. So you can see, I won't go in full into the many, many layers of this map, but it is really that simple. These green next step buttons allow you to navigate the various scenarios and options. I think it's really important to flag that we also have these blue buttons, the find out more buttons. And what happens when you click on these is that you get a really useful information and links page, giving you, as you'd expect, a lot more information. This one, we want to know who the owner is and if they have plans for the land, tells you how to find out who owns the land. All of these links are live and take you through to the websites and organisations that are outlined here. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. Okay. As I said, I've just scratched the surface and the map is quite involved with a lot of pathways and information in there. It does reflect the variety of challenges and solutions that people face when transforming vacant and derelict land. So in there, you'll find common questions answered, for example, how to find the owner of land, which is what we just looked at, what options for collaboration, lease or ownership are available in different circumstances, what are the different interim or longer term uses for different plots of land, for example, enterprise solutions, local growing, or new green space development. Crucially, it also signposts what funding is available to make new projects happen. So it's good to spend some time digging into that and exploring the different pathways and exploring the different find out more information pages. The link to this map and many more collated resources are actually found on a dedicated webpage on the Scottish Land Commission website called Transforming Vacant and Derelict Land. I'm actually going to show you that because it has a lot of great other resources on there. And sorry, I seem to have been muted there. I'm just going to show you the Transforming Vacant and Derelict Land website on the Scottish Land Commission page. Okay. So this page looks like this. As we scroll down, you can see we have a number of resources. The dusty interactive map, which I'll let you explore in your own time and read about in your own time. But the thing that I really want to flag today is the getting started resources. Here's the link to the community route map that we were just looking at. But I want to flag up two other resources, the toolkit and the funding table specifically. Let's click on this and look at the toolkit. So this community impacts toolkit is a way to support local authorities, local organisations in collecting evidence. And this evidence can inform feasibility studies, funding applications, planning and placemaking. So for those a little bit further along in their journey, this can be a really invaluable tool. The other thing I just want to flag up very quickly is this funding table. So I'm going to scroll down again just to get you a sense of what's in here. So there are 10 pages listing a great number of different funds and funders available that can support the type of projects that are undertaken in transforming vacant and derelict land. And you can see here that we have live links to the funds. We have the project type that it will support, the location, who can apply, and also when it's open and how much is available to apply for. I'm just going to stop sharing my screen. So I appreciate that was a little bit of a whirlwind tour, but hopefully that's a good starting point. If you're at the start of your learning journey about vacant and derelict land and you know you want to do some work and are not quite sure where to start, I think those tools are a really helpful place to get started and get your thinking going. And now I'm going to hand over to Emma to facilitate the rest of the session.
Thanks, Lisa. That was really great. And people can find the links to all of the things that Lisa introduced there in the chat. If you have any feedback on them, if you have a go with them, then do let us know. We're always really pleased to hear from people who've tried them and think they could be improved a little way or found them useful. That's really great to hear for us. So we're going to start with David Henderson. David is going to talk to us about the services that the Community Ownership Support Service at DTAS can bring. David, are you ready to come in? And I think you're going to share your screen as well.
Yeah, hi, thanks, Emma. I think my camera's been switched off.
Does that, you should have a thing pop up now. Oh, okay, yep. Great.
Okay, so first of all, thanks for the invite today. Looking forward to it, and hello to everybody in the room. I recognise quite a few names, so that's nice. I'm going to share my screen, and here we are. So. Hopefully people can see that. Let me know if you can. I've been warned I've got 5 minutes, and I'll be pulled off if I speak for longer than that. So I'll just get straight into it if you don't mind. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Community Ownership Support Service, who I work for, and what we do. So the Community Ownership Support Service, or COSS, we're part of Development Trust Association for Scotland, DTAS. And what we do is we're funded by the Scottish Government to support communities all across Scotland who are interested in community ownership. So whether it's lease or ownership, publicly owned buildings, also to a degree privately owned, we will support groups on that journey. And we're a fairly flexible service. So we'll work with groups at any stage on that journey, and we'll work with them on whatever needs they have to progress their interest. So in a nutshell, that's what we do, really. We also work with the public sector that own many of the assets, the land and the buildings that communities may be interested in. And we work with them to develop their community asset transfer policies and processes behind the scenes. So that's what we do generally. Much of our work is guided by the Community Empowerment Act 2015, in particular Part 5, Community Asset Transfer or Asset Transfer Requests. I'm not going to say too much about that. Part 4 will also be of interest to some of you, the Community Right to Buy, and there are community rights built in there that I think are of particular interest in terms of vacant derelict land. There is a compulsory purchase process for groups who are interested in vacant and derelict land. The tests for groups, for community groups, are quite high, but there are rights and processes there for groups who are interested in vacant and derelict land too. But the work that we do is primarily around Part 5 community asset transfer. When I talk about the rights, what do they actually look like in practice? So in terms of rights that communities have, they have a right to request information on any publicly owned asset, land or a building, and the information that a local authority or a public sector body might hold about that asset. So they can request information, running costs, copy of title, all that kind of thing. They can request the transfer of any publicly owned asset. It doesn't have to be on a surplus list. Any building that you or land that you're interested in, publicly owned, you could request the transfer of that. There is an assumption built into the community rights that you as a community group will be successful on that journey, unless there are good reasons why you shouldn't be. And I think the key thing here is that the process is very transparent. It's all online. So if your application is turned down, then the reasons for that need to be explained, and they're there online to be challenged, if you like. It's up to the community to decide what they wish to offer, whether it's outright ownership or a lease. The community can offer what they think the asset is worth, based upon the community and social and economic benefits that they will produce by running that asset. So they can discount the value of the asset based upon the community good that they are doing. And one of the other key rights is the right of appeal. So if you're unhappy with the outcome, you can seek a review or an appeal, and you can appeal all the way to the Scottish Government if you're unhappy with the process. So they are quite powerful rights that are built into the process. There's also a requirement on the public sector to make available the assets that they hold. So here's an example from Perth and Kinross's website. So if you're interested in looking around in your area, there should be something online that allows you to do that. Not all public authorities have got that up, but they're supposed to have. And I'm going to end just with a few of the resources that we have that community groups can use. So this is one of our route maps. This is a route map on community asset transfer. We also have route maps on privately negotiated transfers and community right to buy as well. And it's a pretty helpful tool, I think, for communities to help get their head around where they are in this process, the questions they need to ask, who they need to speak to, and what information they need on their journey to asset transfer. So they're fairly big maps, useful, I think, for groups to kind of have over a table and just kind of scroll all over them, and it can stimulate discussion and debate about the process and what groups need to do next. So it can be quite a useful tool, I think. Within our team, we've got a legal advisor. So in terms of vacant derelict land, there are very complex issues around ownership and issues about how to approach potential owners to express an interest. So we've got a legal advisor that can provide support to groups and advice on that kind of thing. And finally, hopefully this is within the 5 minutes, in terms of the sort of resources that we have, there are a variety of things. The modules you can see on your left, there are 6 of those. We deliver those to community groups free of service throughout the year, twice a year. Module 1 is about the community rights. 2 is about conducting feasibility studies. 3 is business planning. 4, finance. 5 is about governance, quite important. And 6 is, once you've actually got the asset, how do you actually run it? What the challenges are, what you need to do. So we run those twice a year, free, any group can join. And as well as that, on our website, we've got a whole range of other resources that groups can use free of charge. A few examples, beyond the usual suspects, is about alternative sources of funding, crowdfunding, shares, that kind of thing. Involving your community is about community engagement. And the bottom left there, public toilets, one of our most popular downloads, would you believe, is about how you can adapt and use toilets for a whole range of community uses. So I'm going to leave it there. The slides will be sent out. Contact details are on that last slide. If you're interested in getting in touch, please feel free to get in touch and say hello. Thank you.
Thanks so much, David. There's just a wealth of things out there to help people these days navigate the whole process. It can be complicated, but it's great to know that you're there to have that conversation with. And then there's that really kind of structured learning experience there as well that people can undertake. Thanks so much for that. There's a question in the chat for you. Are COS resources available to non-DTAS members?
Yeah, anybody's got an interest in this can get in touch, and they're all free.
Absolutely. And there's loads on the website too, I think, anyway. Yeah, great. Okay, thank you so much. Carey, you're up next. And I think you're going to be taking us through a few examples of projects. So that sounds really great. Over to you.
Hi, everyone. I hope you can see me and hear me. I'm just going to share some slides here. Those will come on board in just a minute. So you should be able to see my slides now. Great. So what I have here, there's some examples. A bit of an explanation about Community Land Scotland. We're an organization that is a membership organization for community landowners across Scotland. It's over 120 members shown on that map, which you can check out on our website, who have purchased land or buildings and brought them into community ownership. We were set up in 2011 by those who argued that land reform should happen more quickly, should continue. It's a process, and that community land ownership is a key part of that. Moving then on to our approach to our work and onto the vacant and derelict land that I'm going to discuss today. So at Community Land Scotland, we advocate for community land ownership to be easier, and we support community groups in their journey to do this in a variety of ways. We focus on private negotiated sales and giving tips and some guidance on community right to buy as well. There are 711 assets currently in community land ownership across Scotland, and the majority of those have been purchased through a private negotiated sale, like you would purchase any type of property. So we're quite collaborative, and what I would say is get in touch with any questions. What I don't have today are lots of links to existing tools, because I knew that the Land Commission and DTAS would come in with their wealth of to do is give some insight into our work on vacant and derelict land, and ask people to ask questions and follow up as appropriate. So my role at Community Land Scotland is to manage an action research project that we have on the Clyde Valley, and one of our objectives is vacant and derelict land, and specifically community-led approaches to that. So just going to run through some of those and give us some examples. So the work that we're doing in the Clyde Valley is really, it's a one-stop shop, in the sense that people can get in touch with us and ask any questions that they have about vacant and derelict land or community land ownership, and we'll refer them or help them as appropriate. We work closely with David Henderson, because he also works in the Clyde Valley, for example, on these things collaboratively. And in terms of the, sorry, I just can't quite see that. There we are. Our work is focusing on early stage groups, so we get a lot of inquiries from people who are wondering what's happening with the site at the end of my street. That is sort of the common approach we would get. And our starting point on this, in terms of vacant and derelict land and buildings, is that communities should be able to purchase these if they want to do that, using their community land rights and all the other supports that Scottish communities have. Vacant and derelict land sites tend to be quite complicated, particularly for purchase, because they're vacant and derelict. They're going to be complicated, generally speaking. And also that communities should buy assets, not liabilities. They should be buying things that work for them in terms of their business plans, in terms of meeting the community need. So we're a little bit hesitant, I suppose, in a starting point in terms of promoting vacant and derelict land, unless communities are driving forward on that vision. Now, with that as a starting point, what I would say in the 2 years that we've been working in the Clyde Valley, there's been a really strong community interest in vacant and derelict land. So 37% of our inquiries over those 2 years have been about vacant and derelict land and property. And also the last point, which is that there's a bit of a lack of a funding gap around this, which is that of the 38 sites that we've looked at for community groups in the Clyde Valley, only 8 of those, or 20%, are officially vacant and derelict. So they're going to appear on a map. And meanwhile, the council funding has been quite tricky, as is many things that council is funding. So I just wanted to point out there that many of the sites that communities are interested in are often not on these official maps, which presents other challenges. So going then to the next slide. There we are. Some examples now, what's happening, tools and tricks. So here's one example of, it's actually an ownerless land site. So what happens, the challenge there is that if a private company dissolves and does not reform after 6 years, it becomes ownerless, officially ownerless. This is an example of an ownerless site. It's in the west end of Glasgow. The community there has been very persistent. They've been involved in the site for 20 years. They have submitted multiple planning applications to implement their land use site, but were unable to implement those planning applications because they didn't know who the landowner was. And so the first, I suppose, tool that I've listed there for attendees to think about is persistence, which comes up quite a lot on these sites. I've picked this one as the first example because there is actually a new property transfer scheme for ownerless land, which is headed up by the organization called the Kings and Lord Treasurer Remembrancer, which is called the KLTR more easily. And they deal with treasure troves, which is why there's a bit of treasure on my slide, including property treasure, which is ownerless. And they've put in place a new transfer scheme for communities to avail of land which is ownerless at cost, which can be quite beneficial to community groups. So if you have potential ownerless land, be aware that things are changing on that, and there's potentially new property transfer scheme, and also that the Scottish Land Fund is now in a position to support ownerless land where communities are looking to purchase that. One other example then of a tenement garden here. The challenge on this site was it's been vacant for more than 10 years. And it's been an informal community garden use. There's an expired planning consent on it, and enforcement action was occurring 2 years ago that the community became involved in. The tools that they have used now to bring this land into productive use and to implement their vision for it is they've been collecting information. They became very involved in the planning enforcement case. They started reaching out to get more resources. They're very creative. There's some photos here of some of their community engagement materials. And they have in the process of formally submitting a community right to buy this land so that they would have first right to purchase it if the landowner puts it up for sale. And then they're going to proceed with a negotiated sale as the current strategy. They're also proceeding with Scottish Land Fund support to bring this land into community land ownership. Another example of a vacant and derelict site that we've been working on, and this is one that David Henderson will know more about than me, is that this is a site we were asked to look at recently. It's actually an official vacant and derelict land site. So it's one of those rarer sites that we get asked about, which is on the official register. In this case, there are actually 5 landowners you can see in the map there for one official vacant and derelict land site. It's quite an illustrative example of the challenges that community groups face. In this case, there's a community group who occupies one of the buildings that's adjacent there. They were wondering who owns this site, which is actually just a grassy pitch. Well, 5 different landowners in this case. And they're also interested in the staircase, which is shown here, and where the Registers of Scotland are actually unable to find who owns that staircase. So we're still working on that. But again, that's an example of the level of challenge that you can come across when community groups attempt to resolve these kinds of issues. So tools then, well, information and being collaborative. So information here really clarifies and potential next steps or the ways in which the community could move forward. And the other tool in this case, of course, is that there's potential for accessing those formal vacant and derelict land funding because it's an official site. I'm waiting for Emma to come in because I think I might be over my time, but do you want one more, Emma, or we move on to Mags? One more. Final example then is the derelict building that one of our members asked us about. You can see in the picture, it is falling down and it's a health and safety risk. There were no local landowner contact details for this building. It's an absentee landowner. So the community group has been struggling to make that safe. It was also occupied. There's quite a long street with occupation in the building, and the community organization is hesitant to become involved in the local politics, would be involved in potentially forcing those occupiers to move out of these buildings despite the state that they're in. It's an interesting example about how local politics can play out in some cases. And this actually has a good story, because I know that the council was on site this week making this building safe, which was a win for the community organization. They were considering using community rights on it, but ultimately that wasn't a priority for the organization at this point. And it's great to hear that it's being made safe. So that's my final example. I would just say get in touch if you have any questions at all.
That's great. Thank you so much, Carey. You've highlighted some of the real kind of challenges in tackling vacant derelict land, some of the things for communities to start off by thinking about, how will they use these things, and what would the kind of business plan and model be that they have as well. Could you stop sharing your screen? We've got your desk in front of us. Thanks, that's
there
great.
We are. I'm looking for that.
Thanks, Carey. Great, let's hand over to Mags then. Mags works for Highlands and Islands Enterprise as Head of Social Enterprise. Mags, are you ready to go? I don't think you've got any slides, so I shall just hand straight over to you.
Oh, that's good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for your interest this afternoon. I'm, as Emma's mentioned, I'm McSporran. I'm part of the Police Directorate of Highlands Enterprise. A wee bit about Highlands and Islands Enterprise. We're one of 3 enterprises for Scotland funded by Scottish Government.
Mags, I'm just going to interrupt you briefly.
Enterprise, and so we.
Could you switch your video off? It's a little bit sounds a little bit unclear, and that might help.
Oh, yeah. Apologies.
No worries. Thanks, Mag.
Any better? Okay, so that's great. You can do without seeing me anyway. It's grand. So we are one of 3 social enterprise agencies. We're one of 3 enterprise agencies in Scotland. There's Highlands and Islands Enterprise, there's South of Scotland Enterprise, and there's Scottish Enterprise. Within Highlands and Islands Enterprise remit and South of Scotland remit, we have remit for economic and community development. And like our sister agency, Scottish Enterprise, who's responsible solely for economic development. So how does that make what we do slightly different? Our vision is to ensure that the Highlands and Islands is a prosperous, inclusive, sustainable region, attracting more people to live, work, study, invest and visit. So our priorities in that are building successful, productive and resilient enabling communities. And we work in doing business. We work with enterprises. We have a population of around 500,000 out of Scotland's 5.4 million. Inverness is a town, and we have high levels of self-employment as well as qualified working. If the Highland geographic fault line, geological fault line, that's the sort of territory that we cover. So we work with this region. So from south end of Carey right up to the very northern tip of Shetland and right the way out. And our east. So work that we do support regeneration with
Mags, I'm afraid we're really still struggling to hear you.
Oh no, a shame.
I'm so sorry. I think it must be the internet connection.
You're fine. It stop, Emma. Is it so that we stop?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. Would you be able to send us something, something around, Mags, that we can circulate? That would be great. Thank you so much.
Yes, will do. Thank
you. Thank you. Okay. So in that case, let's move on to Q&A. I'll ask the panelists to unmute themselves and put their videos back on, if that's okay. And we'll see what questions we have coming in. So if anybody has any questions they'd like to any questions they'd like to ask, then please pop them in the Q&A box. It's at the bottom of your screen usually, and it looks like 2 chat bubbles down the bottom there. That can be anonymous, or you can put your name on it. Or if you're more comfortable popping a question in the chat, then of course, feel free to do that as well. That's absolutely fine. So let's just start off. There was a question here about the land register. And Carey, you've actually answered this a bit on the chat. Would you like to explain to everybody a little bit about what the land register is for those who aren't aware, and what it is about updating it that's coming forward?
Yeah, so the Registers of Scotland have a land register. They actually have 2 main land registers that identify ownership. There's a map that you can search, which anyone can go online and have a look at that. There's also a register of Sassines, which is the older land ownership information or register. It's not map based. So between those 2 of those is how land ownership is determined, which is why it's so complicated and tricky at this point. I put a link in the chat to the Registers of Scotland's summary of where they are with completing the land register. They've got stats down by to a local authority area about how they're doing it. And they're going for something called functional completion by the end of next year, which means they're having to make quite a few guesses, I think, about legal guesses about land ownership in some cases that will enable people to move forward on things without resolving all of the tricky legal issues, which may take quite some time, I think.
Great. Okay. Thank you so much. So often that's the starting point for people if they contact the Land Commission. And I guess maybe it's the same for you, David, as well, around actually who owns this land? How do I find that out?
Yeah, so I think about 50% of Scotland is currently on the land register, and some of it will never find its way on there. So, you know, it's an ongoing challenge. Groups are free to, they can approach us and we will do searches of title for them and do our best to try and identify who actually owns things. But undoubtedly it is a challenge, and a particular challenge in terms of vacant derelict land, undoubtedly.
Great, thank you. For other people, what might be the starting point when they come to any of you looking for support on this? What are the kind of key things that people need assistance with? Carey or David?
I think that there are usually so many things in terms of what groups are looking for when they come to us. But I think in terms of vacant derelict land, I think the challenges are much harder. I mean, we hosted a pilot project along with yourselves around vacant derelict land. It was lasted a couple of years. I think you mentioned, or Lisa mentioned, South Seeds and Carluke. They were both part of that pilot. There were about 7 or 8 projects assisted, and I think my take on the learning is that the challenges. I mean, I think the groups in question made incredible progress given the challenges, but the challenges are just, you know, who funds the costs of the remediation of the land, for example. Once you've identified who owns the land, who funds the cost of that, because that's a significant barrier. I think there are lots of technical requirements that groups need to address: feasibility, appraisal, site conditions. There's a lot of technical things in there that need to be pulled together, and many of the groups that I work with probably don't have the skills and capacity to do that readily. So, and then how you manage consultants and how you control teams of consultants. I think also one of the other challenges around vacant derelict land is around partnership. It's not the sort of thing a group can really do on its own. I think it needs to be able to work probably with the local authority, and to tap into the Vacant Derelict Land Fund or Regeneration Capital Grant Fund. So I think this really is about collaboration with the public sector in a way that sometimes other community asset transfers aren't quite. They're a bit more straightforward sometimes. So there are just big fundamental challenges. But I think the thing that came out of the pilot that we've been involved in, the 2-year pilot, was that when groups do make progress, there can be some spectacular results in terms of benefits and outcomes. So it can be really exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. There's some wonderful projects out there, but as you say, it does take quite a broad range of skills and resources. So to your mind, partnership is one way of bringing in those different kind of types of capacity and resources into a project. I think that's really helpful. Yeah. A question for you, Carey, I think here. So you mentioned about the register of vacant and derelict land and kind of official vacant derelict land. Now, Maggie was asking about a piece of land for sale. It's a rundown petrol station. It's no longer in use, but it is used as a part-time garage. So does that qualify as derelict land? What's the kind of definition here that we're looking at, and what makes it onto the official register and what doesn't make it onto the official register?
Yeah, well, I think it's also questions perhaps back to the Land Commission, because I think one of the recommendations from the task force on vacant and derelict land that you had was to review the register. So there's an official register, and the way it works is that councils self-report vacant and derelict sites to that, and only those sites that are on that register can avail of the current Scottish Government funding sources for that. And they tend to be quite large, so they also are more than 0.1 of a hectare, so 100 square meters, which is relatively large. And that site that I showed you, the West End site, which is ownerless, is about 0.10 of a hectare. You could fit a house on that. It's a pretty big community, decent sized community garden. And those are just going to be excluded by definition, for example. So there's just a funding gap there in terms of communities. Our work has lots. So we have another year of our project, which is operational. So the project I'm managing is 3 years, and we're just finishing up the year 2. But there is really strong evidence that communities are very interested in vacant and derelict sites, but most of them are smaller than that 0.10 of a hectare. They're not officially on the register. So community interest maybe are aimed at smaller sites, and not these high profile ones that maybe been long-term vacant for 20 years, really bad remediation. Maybe there's a separate source of funding needed to help communities tackle the smaller ones. In terms of the site Maggie's asking about, and specifically, I don't think that one's on the register, but Maggie and I have spoken about that site, so we can take that up separately.
Okay, that's great.
Thank you. Right, one way or the other.
Okay, that's great. There's a couple of other comments in the chat that I'd invite you as the panelists to have a look at and answer at some point. But we do have to wrap up. So I'm going to pass over to Lisa, who's going to do our final poll. And just to give a great thanks so much to our panelists for taking part today. It's so tricky. There's so much out there. It's such an important topic. I think the one kind of key message for me from this is there is help out there, there is support, and to get in touch if they have any questions. And I'm sure you can all signpost people to other resources as and when that's helpful as well. Okay, back over to you, Lisa.
Thanks, Emma. And yeah, just to echo the thanks to everyone today for bringing their detailed knowledge and their expertise of the subject and being able to talk to everyone so clearly and so eloquently about the work that they do and the challenges that people face. So thank you to all our panelists today, and of course to Emma. I'm just going to launch a poll, which I hope folks can get involved in. This time it's 5 questions, and again, you scroll through to answer those. In the meantime, I'm just going to flag that it's actually the end of our Land at Lunch webinar series. We've had 11 of these, and this is the last one today. We'd really like to hear from people who've been to several or been to more than one. So in a moment, I'm going to pop our contact details for the Good Practice team. If you'd like to be involved in some slightly longer evaluation, well, not long evaluation, but evaluation of the longer form project, we'd be really, really grateful. I'm going to pop those contact details in a moment. The other thing I'm going to pop into the chat is the resources page. And I want to just flag that all our resources page are within a larger resource kind of hub that we've been trying out based within Wakelet. So I'm going to pop them in there in a moment too. So a lot of the things that we talked about today, ownerless land, how communities get involved in having a voice in their local area, we have resources pages on those topics too, because they've featured in past webinars. So do take time to have a wee look and see what else is on there that could be useful to you. I'll be quiet now. I'll put those links in the chat and I'll let people continue that poll for just a minute more. Okay, and for the sake of just managing to wrap up almost on time. I think we're allowed to run over by 1 minute on our last session. I think it's fine. I just want to say, if you want to find out about future events, please check out our socials. We're always posting about upcoming events, webinars, in-person events, training, things that you can get involved in, and also information and news from our partners, like the people that have been involved today. So I'm going to end this poll and say thank you very much to everyone involved. And for now, see you next time.